Howdy. Today we'll be talking about configuration files. Basically, configuration files allow you to store and save information fairly easily to a relatively small sized file called a YML file, and you can read through that information in plain text fairly easily. Now, config files are used for more than just storing information. In that, you'll see a lot. If you've ever used Bukkit plugins before, if we pop over to my FTP, you can see there's data folders for all of them, and inside config.yml files. Basically, that allows you usually to edit small bits of the plugin to better suit your server's needs. But other files outside of the config.yml usually just stores information. So first things first, we're going to set up a couple variables here. Now, basically what we're doing is, now you might have to import these as well, the file and file configuration, but we're setting up some default variables for the files, or config file and user file, and then the name of those configurations. If we pop back down to my onEnable method, you can see, well, we'll start about right there and copy those in, talk about them a little bit. So extending the Java plugin gives us a lot of great tools and resources. These are Java plugin methods. So basically what we're doing is we're pulling the config and their options, and we're setting those options to default. Now you can edit those defaults, but right now it's just going to be a blank file. We'll go ahead and save that default configuration. The next thing we want to do, we'll set up a couple if statements. So right here, we're saying that the file directory equals Java plugins data folder. So we're setting the base directory as a data folder, which of course are all these folders here, usually named after the plugin. And if that directory does not exist and we cannot make that directory, let's go ahead and send an info or a message back to the server. Could not create data folder. Cool. Now, the last thing you see here in my onEnable method is something called create files, and that's a custom method I set up myself. So let's learn a little more about that. So if we pop down here, you can see that's the method, and we'll go ahead and create that as well. So it's just a public void, right? Because we're not processing or returning information, rather not processing it. We are processing information. But create files, and inside, some of that might look a little confusing, but we'll break it down step by step. So what we're doing here is, with those same variables we set up here, we're now setting them to actual files. So what we're doing is config_f equals a new file, should be inside of the data folder. That's another method from the Java plugin, right? Get data folder. And we're going to go ahead and name it config.yml. We'll do the same thing for a user file. And again, you can store ridiculous amounts of information in these, and in a pretty clean and organized way. So the user.yml will write a little bit to that today. But first, we've got to set up a couple if statements here. And they're both relatively the same thing. So you can see basically what we're doing is, paste those in. We're saying if that config file that we set up here does not exist, we'll make it. So we're saying config_f.getParent_file, or rather the parent directory, right? The data folder. And we'll make that. And then we'll save that resource as config.yml, and we'll do the same thing for user, but as user.yml. Alright, next thing we're doing is we're setting up how these files should be configured, and we want them in the YML or YAML configuration. And that looks something like, if we pop over here, this is the YML config. So you have, you know, like if we're doing, I'm just trying to think of an analogy. These are kind of like dictionaries. So car, thing that goes room, right? So word, definition, so to speak, right? It's like a dictionary kind of. So if we let's back up a little bit. So what I'm storing right here is the user's custom ID and then their corresponding class that saves a lot of information about them. So instead of car, or rather word and then definition, I'm using that same concept, but I'm storing the UUID or the user ID to class information. So if we pop back over here, that's what a YML format looks like. Might be a little confusing, and again, I recommend that you guys actually read through that little wiki. I'll post it in the description. That might be able to help you out quite a bit. So something new you guys might not have seen. These are try and catch statements. Basically, they kind of explain themselves, don't they? You're trying something, and if that doesn't work, catch. So basically, in Java and pretty much every other language, there's exceptions that get thrown. So let's say you're trying to do something, and if that doesn't work, it'll throw an exception. Now, in Java, it doesn't really tell you a whole lot about what went down. If I didn't have my try and catch statements here, and I just tried to do that, and it failed, it'd probably return a null error, and then say like, oh, hey, so that returned null, and it threw this exception, but we don't know anything about it because you didn't catch it. So that's what we're doing. So we're catching these exceptions and then printing what happened after the fact. So we're just going to go ahead and try and load those files. And if not, throw an extension, let us know about it in the server console. Great, we're almost done. Last thing we want to do is we're going to set up a way to go about accessing the user.yml file. By default, the Java plugin, the Java plugin extension actually allows us to access our main config file fairly easily. We can actually just do get config dot whatever save. We can save it there, but we can't really do that for the user.yml file yet. So what we're going to do is pop back over here. As you can see, oh, my clips kind of wigs out sometimes. You will see I have another method here that is basically a replacement or solution for that. So we're saying that it's a public file configuration type of method. It's not a void or a boolean. We're looking for a file configuration to be returned, and we're naming this get user config. And then we're returning that file, or rather the file configuration user, right? So that's pulling the user.yml file for us from our data folder and allowing us to do things for it, or to it rather. So maybe let's just do a simple write. So if we come down here, let's say maybe every time someone stores, or every time someone casts a fireball, maybe we want to store their user ID and the spell they casted. So we could say get user config, right, instead of get config. And we can go ahead and there's all sorts of stuff here. We can set, or rather, let's pop over here. So this is how you read and write from it. So like I was talking about key and value, or word and definition, we're doing the same thing. So we'll set the player's ID instead of word, right? We'll set maybe their ID. So that's just get unique ID, and we'll convert that to a string. There we go. And then the value of that will store the spell that they casted. So you do What is that? args0, right? Because we're expecting them to type fireball. So this will store their unique ID, which is a long list of like numbers and letters, and the type of fireball or type of spell they sent. Alright, so that's pretty much the end of it. The last thing you need to do is, and I've already created these files, but as you can see over here in the sidebar, I have a config and a user.yml. You'll just go ahead and right click on your package, new file, and then create both of those. It's just config.yml and user.yml. It's important that you actually create those. Alright, so that's it. Let's go ahead and export this bad boy. Test it out a little bit. So hit finish. Yep, that's what we want. So overwrite it. All good. There were no real errors. I think it's just telling us about some imports or something. So again, you would drag and drop that into your server folder and then your plugin folder. But again, I have a FTP server. I'll drag and drop it in there, and then you'll have to go ahead and reload your plugins or restart your server. I recommend restarting, actually. But so the command is tutorial fireball, right? And it shoots a fireball. Wow, great. So now that that's complete, if we reload all of this here, you can see we now have our data folder, right? Tutorial, and inside are 2 files. And if we open those up, you can see the information has been, oh, ow, that's what I messed up. All right. We'll have to save that information first. Alright, so we'll get user config. My apologies here. We'll .save. Now, the way to go about doing this is setting it up in a try and catch statement like we were talking about earlier. Because if you fail to save the file, it'll throw an exception, and we want to go ahead and catch that. Basically, what we're doing here is saying, get our user config. We'll save it. We'll save it as a new file in the data folder, and we'll overwrite user.yml. Great. Now it will save. My apologies, everyone. It's okay. We'll just export really quick. I'm going to show you guys what we saved. So let's go ahead and reload. Go back, come on. Well, at least we know our files and folder got created. So that's good. Alright, great. Since that plugin's now in here, I can reload it a little quicker. Tutorial. Great. So if we pop back up, shoot another fireball, and then reload, come back into tutorial, that should be saved now. Ah, it is. So you can see that's my unique Minecraft user ID and the type of spell I cast. Just like what we saved over here. So yeah, don't forget to save your configuration files after you've edited them. Because otherwise the information won't be saved. So remember to save any edits. Okay, well, that concludes the lesson here. Thanks for watching, everyone. I appreciate it. If you guys are actually getting any use out of these videos, that's cool. I'm not very good at talking or explaining things, so I hope I'm getting the point across with these videos. In any case, the next video, I figure we can edit more information inside these config files and maybe start storing stuff such as spell cooldowns and more user information. Maybe we can create some sort of user class that edits the player's in-game attributes or some other fun stuff. We'll start jumping more and more into advanced techniques here in the next few videos. Again, if you guys have any questions, post them down in the comments or shoot me a message. I'm always happy to answer those. Okay, we'll see you guys.